Welcome back. Earlier this week, I traveled to New Hampshire for Senator Kamala Harris's first trip to that state. When we spoke last summer, she was, of course, coy about whether or not she was going to run. But now she's in, and she's distinguished herself early in a crowded field, with voters in early campaign states packing her events, eager to hear what she stands for, and, of course, how she plans to beat the president. As this primary unfolds, how do you view your path to the nomination? I've heard you say now here in New Hampshire, you're going to be here a lot. I know you've already been to Iowa, but you started out in South Carolina. How do you see this campaign playing out for you?
I plan on working really hard. I plan on talking to as many voters as I can. I feel very strongly that it is important to listen as much as we talk, and actually more than we talk, to hear how people are feeling, what their concerns are, to be challenged in terms of what the priorities should be, so that at the end of this process, we not only win, but that we are relevant. And that's how I'm thinking about our path.
And how do you win back voters across the Midwest who decided that they wanted to put Donald Trump in office?
Listen, when it comes down to it, I'm going to compete for every vote, regardless of who people voted for in the last election. And I believe that the vast majority of Americans have so much more in common than what separates us. When people are waking up in the middle of the night with the thought that's weighing on them, they're not thinking about it through the lens of the party with which they're registered to vote. And they're thinking about those issues like their personal health, the health of their family. They're thinking about, can they get a job, keep a job? For our students, can they pay off their student loans? Those are the issues that are prevalent issues, that are the issues that keep people awake in America today. And I plan on talking about those issues. I plan on offering solutions to those problems. And I believe that, that people will care about that.
You don't tend to say President Trump in your speeches. You will refer to the Trump administration. What's the strategy behind that?
Well, it is about an administration's policies, and obviously led by the president, but it is also about a cabinet and members of the cabinet. It is also about how it plays out in terms of the enforcement of those priorities, all of which are bad.
Do you think there's a risk in talking too much or going after the president too much with Democratic voters? Do you think they're looking for what Democrats stand for? Is that part of it?
I feel very strongly, Casey, that this has to be an election about America's future. And obviously in the context of where we are now, but for me, my motivation, my goal is to talk about where we can be, unburdened by where we have been, and unburdened by where we are right now. There is so much at stake, and obviously it is about change. It is about having new leadership in our country so we can get where we need to go. But truly, we're looking at a world that is in flux. Issues like climate change, issues like what we're going to do in terms of developing the workforce of the 21st century. These are issues that are transcendent issues, and meaning where are we going to be as a nation on these issues, and are we going to have leadership that is forward-thinking or that is looking behind us?
Bernie Sanders jumped into the presidential race today. You said that you are not a Democratic Socialist.
I am not.
What's the difference between a Democrat and a Democratic Socialist in your mind?
Well, I can talk about who I am. I believe that we have got to have a system that recognizes that it has not been working for everyone equally. So I support capitalism. It in theory is something that requires competition that will allow us to be better and evolve. But there are assumptions also that are wrong, that it applies equally to all people, that all people can compete equally. That's just not the case in America today. So I also say that we have to correct course. We have to recognize that the rules over the last many decades have been written in a way that have excluded working middle-class families. And that's why I proposed, for example, that we change the tax code in a way that families who are making less than $100,000 a year will get a tax credit that they can collect at up to $500 a month, because the almost majority of American families today cannot afford an unexpected $400 expense. We have to correct course.
Let me ask you about health care. You had said at one point that you thought it would be okay to eliminate private insurance. Now I realize that you are on several bills that would not go that far. Do you think eliminating private insurance would be a socialist idea?
No. Okay, so I strongly believe that we need to have Medicare for all. And within that system,
Do you think that's socialist or not, Medicare for all?
No. No, it's about providing health care to all people. It's about understanding that access to affordable health care should not be a privilege, it should be a right. It's about understanding that in a democracy, and the way we have constructed our democracy, we, at least in concept, have said that your access to public education, public health, or public safety should not be a function of how much money you have. But in America today, that's not the case. In America today, one of the leading causes of bankruptcy for American families is the inability to pay a hospital bill. That's just simply wrong.
Let me ask you also about Senator Sanders. He is somebody who, while he was part of the civil rights movement when he was a young man, has struggled to talk to black voters and did in his 2016 campaign. Do you think Bernie Sanders understands the unique struggles of African Americans in this country?
I'm sure he does. I would hope he does.
Have you seen that in his previous campaigns? Do you think that he has done enough to try to talk to Democratic voters who are African American?
Let's just agree that the issue of race in America is a very real issue that everyone should be informed about and think about. I just sponsored a bill that for the first time will recognize the crime of lynching. And it was 200 years in the making that finally we would have the United States Senate recognize and pass legislation recognizing it to be a crime.
I imagine most Americans already thought it was.
Yeah, but it wasn't.
Which is remarkable.
And the other piece about this is that there are a lot of Americans who do not realize the significance of recognizing that for generations we had a system in America where black people were being the victims of horrific crimes, kidnapped from their homes, dragged, hung from trees, castrated, right? I'm sorry for the graphic detail, but there is so much about America's history on the issue of race that is not discussed and is not known, and to our collective detriment. And I would hope and believe that anyone who purports to be a leader in our country would be acutely aware of our history on the issue of race and be sensitive to the implications of and the product of history of slavery, and then a history of Jim Crow, a history of legal segregation and discrimination, and then actual segregation and discrimination even today, and that we would all know that when we want to do the work we do, we represent all people, and we should recognize the history that people have in our country and seek to remedy the harm that may exist.
Let me ask you as we wrap up here, Andrew McCabe, and this is more of a question in the vein of your role on the Senate Intelligence Committee, where I normally see you.
Yes, yes.
Andrew McCabe said that the Gang of Eight was briefed on a counterintelligence investigation, the counterintelligence investigation that was opened into the president. Are you aware of that? Were you aware of that? Was that something that went to the broader committee as well?
I can't talk about what we do in Senate intelligence, but I will say that I'm aware of the reports of what he has been saying recently, and I think that people should pay attention to those reports.
Do you trust Andrew McCabe?
I don't know. I believe that there is no question, however, that the president has relied on Vladimir Putin over the men and women who have sacrificed, in many cases, are willing to sacrifice their lives. They are the intelligence community of the United States, to give the president information that he should believe and upon which he should base his priorities around who are our friends and who are not. And I think there's been a real failure to do that, and that's a real subject of concern for me, and it should be for all of us.
And my thanks to Senator Kamala Harris, of course, 2020 Democratic presidential candidate. Susan, where do you see Senator Harris in this field? She has sort of taken a quick leap into, I'm not going to go so far as to say a front-runner status, kind of considering the state of play at the moment with so many people involved, but certainly taking notice as a member of the top tier. But she has run into a couple, tough questions about Jussie Smollett and some other issues. She didn't seem to answer the question about what was the difference between a Democrat and a Democratic Socialist there, which I think is going to be a main attack from the President of the United States.
Yeah, and she didn't answer a lot of questions, and that's where she now has to kind of bring it. She did a great rollout. She's raised some money. She is in that top tier. I always look at it, if you name the top 3, 4 people, and her name is always in that category. But now she has to answer some questions, and I think she's a little unsteady on her footing. She may know her positions, but she's not projecting them. And I don't fault just her. There's going to be a lot of people like that. I mean, Elizabeth Warren has lacked details at times, so has Bernie Sanders, and a whole host of others. But now you've got to keep that front-runner status, and you have to bring it every time. And frankly, I didn't see her doing that here.
If I were in the Trump re-elect team, God forbid, but if I were,
stipulating you were not.
my number 1 choice would be Bernie Sanders as an opponent, and my number 2 would be Senator Harris. When you're talking about supporting Medicare for all or a Green New Deal that are trillion-dollar expenses with no real discussion about how you're going to pay for it, that's going to be a very powerful theme for the president to say, whatever else you think of me, what they're proposing is fiscally ruinous. And by the way, it will be able to obviate some of the fiscal claims that could be made about this administration.
Philip, how long do you think these candidates can keep the gloves off of the others in the Democratic field? I mean, that was one thing, you know, Kamala Harris declined a very easy, frankly, opportunity to criticize Bernie Sanders, who had announced his run on the day that we did that interview.
Well, I think Bernie Sanders is sort of an interesting outlier in the field as well. Bernie Sanders already has a massive popular following, right? So I think
$6 million in a day.
Right. So I think that if you're going to start throwing punches, the last place you're going to start is with Bernie Sanders. It'll come. We're going to get to the debates sooner than anyone in America realizes, and I think that'll start happening. I do want to come back to what Brett just said about Kamala Harris. I think Kamala Harris is not who Donald Trump wants to face. I think one of the reasons that Donald Trump eked by Hillary Clinton in the Electoral College is because a lot of African-American voters didn't come out and vote in 2016. I think that she could certainly do better there, and I think that she is someone who can balance between what the Democrats are saying to appeal to Democrats, particularly the broader liberal base of the Democratic Party, which has expanded over the past 2 years. She can talk that talk, but she can also talk a more moderate talk. And I think that what we heard there was a politician who is very good at giving very politician-y answers, which suggests to me that she is probably fairly well positioned within the field, even outside of the fact that she's doing well.
We will see if that works, though, in a primary where people are demanding so much authenticity from their candidates. Philip Bump, Susan Del Percio, thank you both so much for coming in tonight. It's great to have you. Coming up.